Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Now we are also available on Telegram, so join our Telegram channel by clicking on the link that is available in the description below to get the latest updates from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 14th June 2021, and the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. Now, after going through this discussion, you should also attempt the quiz that is available on the eLearn platform. So appear in that quiz and test whatever you have learned from this video. Now let us start our discussion. Now this article on page number 6 is related to the issue of cyber security. And the author in this article has highlighted that the challenges that are emanating from the issues related to cyber security are changing in nature. And they are no more restricted to military installations only, but they are also involving attacks on civilian targets. And that is why this is becoming a wider challenge as far as cyber security is concerned. So the article and the points that we discuss in this article are important for us from General Studies paper 3 point of view in the topic security, in which cyber security is a subtopic. In this line it is said that the new kind of warfare will be cyber war. And the cyber war has been termed as fifth dimension of warfare. The other four dimensions of warfare that are existing include land, sea, air, and space. So in this line, cyber warfare will be the fifth dimension or fifth domain of warfare. And as such, the cyber warfare poses a new kind of challenge for the governments across the globe. Now the issue here is that the warfare or the nature of cyber attacks is now changing, and it is not just related to military installations, or the attacks are not just on military installations, but they are also on civilian targets. Now, cybersecurity is one of the important topics in General Studies paper 3 because almost every year a question has been asked related to the issue of cybersecurity. For example, in 2020 we were asked the question which read, discuss different types of cyber crimes and the measures required. In 2019 a question was related to Cyber Dome project. In 2018 it was related to data security. Also in 2017 again there was a question which read threats of cyber security. And in 2015, we were required to critically evaluate the National Cyber Security Policy of 2013. So these questions highlight that the issue or topic of cyber security in General Studies paper 3 is extremely important. And that is why some of the points that we discuss here can be extremely important for us from the mains examination perspective. And in this, it will talk mainly about the changing nature of cyber attacks. That is, it is now shifting from, or it will now be a mix of attacks on military installations as well as these are now targeting the civilian targets as well. Further, if you go through the previous year prelims examination papers, you will find that in the year 2018, a question was asked in the preliminary examination, and it was related to some terms that were in news related to cyber attacks. These included WannaCry, Petya, and Eternal Blue. So of course, they were all related to cyber attacks. So you should prepare or you should be aware of some of the terms that are there in the news. So in this discussion, we'll also look at some of these terms that are there, which are relevant for the issue of cyber security, which can be asked in your preliminary examination. So in this line, the article highlights that recently there have been a lot of cyber attacks. And these cyber attacks are now blurring the line between cyber attacks on military installations and cyber attacks on civilian targets. That is, the line or the difference between military attacks or attacks on military installations and civilian targets is now getting blurred. In this line, the author has first highlighted one of the most infamous cyber attacks of 2020 that was termed as SolarWinds. So this can be a very important fact for us from prelims examination perspective. That is, the term SolarWinds, sometimes seen in the news, is related to cyber security or cyber attacks. So in 2020, cyber attacks were there on US government as well as private companies in United States of America, and they were supposedly sponsored by Russia. Now in this line, these SolarWinds attacks were termed as a campaign, and it was termed as UNC 2452. So again, this term can also become very important for us. And it involved data breaches across several wings of the US government, and it included defense, energy, state, etc. So it was an attack both on government as well as on private companies, which clearly highlights that the cyber attacks are now also happening on even private enterprises as well as on other arms of the government and not just on the military installations. Further, there was an attack by the Chinese group by the name Hafnium, and it attacked the Microsoft software and gained remote control over the affected systems. Then there were ransom attacks on Colonial Pipeline Company of the United States of America, and it had to pay out several $1 million as ransom. Now, during ransomware attack, what happens is that the attacker locks the information of the target, and this is logged by the means of encryption. So by encrypting the data that is there in the target's computer is now encrypted and it will now be logged. So the attacker will now ask for some amount in money in return of providing the key to such encrypted lock of data of the target. So it is similar to, you can say, kidnapping in the real life. So basically, when ransom attack happened on Colonial Pipeline Company, it had to pay out several $1 million as ransom. And finally, the Russian-backed group Nobilium attacked or launched a phishing attack on 3,000 email accounts, and it targeted various important agencies of the United States of America. So all these highlight that there were recently some high-profile cyber attacks which involved both the governments and also the civilian arm of the government as well as the private companies. So this brings us to another debate that has started, that is related to the changing nature of cyber attacks, which is clearly highlighted in this article. So the author says that most of the nations have been concentrating till date mainly on erecting cyber defenses to protect military and strategic targets. And for securing the military and strategic targets, they are preparing defenses against software vulnerabilities that are referred to as a term known as zero-day. Now, what is meant by these zero-day vulnerabilities? So it is basically an attack that exposes a vulnerability in software and creates complicated problems well before anyone realizes this, there is something wrong, and they could lie undetected for a long period of time. So when a software is existing, this kind of vulnerability is introduced into the software. However, the target will not realize that there is some kind of problem. But when the attack happens, it will cripple the whole system. And one of the biggest example of zero-day vulnerability was Stuxnet. And this was used to cripple Iran's uranium enrichment program few years back. So zero-day vulnerability or zero-day is one of the important terms in cybersecurity. And it refers to a type of attack that exposes a vulnerability in software and creates complicated problems well before anyone realizes that there is something wrong, and it can go undetected for a long period of time. So that is what is known as zero-day vulnerability. So the nations across the globe have been preparing defenses to protect military and strategic targets by preparing defenses against software vulnerabilities that are referred to as zero-day vulnerabilities. So this is clearly highlighting what has been the focus of most of the nations right now. However, the author highlights that such zero-day vulnerabilities do not only exist in military and strategic targets, but they could exist outside the military domain as well, in the civilian as well as private companies. So the author is highlighting that the distinction between military and civilian targets is increasingly getting erased. And one of the examples that has been highlighted by the author in this regard is that in 2012 there was a cyber attack on the Saudi Arabia's company or the major oil corporation that is known as Aramco. And this attack was done by a virus by the name Shamoon. So this name of the virus again becomes important for us for prelims examination perspective. And this led to wiping out of memories of around 30,000 computers on the Saudi Aramco Oil Corporation. Now this was supposedly done by Iran. So the attack on Saudi Arabia Aramco Oil Corporation was done by Iran, and this is till date seen as one of the important flashpoints in the disturbance or the geopolitical problems that are going on in West Asia. So clearly we see that cyber war is a reality and it is now affecting the geopolitics as well. Further, in civilian space, the cyber attacks are being conducted by the way of ransomware, phishing and spear phishing. So these are some of the terms that can be important for us from the preliminary examination perspective. So let us understand what is meant by these terms ransomware and spear phishing. Now during a ransomware attack, what happens is that a malicious code blocks the access to the data in the target's computer. And in this, the target receives an infected file, which is typically in the form of an attachment to the email or a URL. And if the target opens this kind of email and attachment, it will lead to installation of that malicious code in the target's computer. And once this malicious code is installed in the target's computer, it locks down the whole data in the computer by the way of encryption. And then the access to the data in that particular computer or network system can only be accessed if the key is provided by the command or the control server, which lies with the cyber attacker. And without this encryption key, all the files on the computer are locked. Now what happens is that the attacker then demands money from the target. And this money is then taken access through the way of, or the payment is done by the way of bitcoins. That is why this is also one of the threats of Bitcoin, because this is beyond the surveillance of the central banks. Similarly, in a phishing attack, what happens is that the attacker distributes email with malicious attachments to the targeted users. And this is sent to the user, and that is known as phishing email. Now, users fail to understand the social engineering trick that has been deployed and open the malicious attachments there. And once the target clicks that attachment, it leads to installation of a kind of program in that particular system, and the data from that particular system is compromised and is stolen by the attacker. So this is how phishing works. So in the phishing attack, what happens is that the attacker creates a kind of email which the target is likely to open. And that is how the attacker will install a kind of program into the target, and that is how the data of the target will be stolen by the attacker. So this is known as phishing attack. In this line, the author has highlighted that the ransomware attacks have skyrocketed with demands and payments getting into multi-millions of dollars. And India figures prominently in this list, being one of the most affected by these ransomware attacks. So in India, the recovery cost from the impact of a ransomware attack has almost tripled, and mid-sized companies in particular face a catastrophic situation if attacked and may even have to cease their operations. So if the companies that are present in India, which are of mid-sized nature, if they are attacked by the ransomware attacks, they will have to cease their operations because of the limited resources that they have. Another area of concern is the attacks on the healthcare data. And the cyber criminals are increasingly targeting a nation's healthcare system and are trying to gain access to patients' data. And the available data aggravates the risk not only to the individuals but also to entire communities. Further, what is the motivation behind such cyber attacks? So for nation states, the motivation is of course geopolitical transformations. For cyber criminals, it is increased profits, and same stands true for the terror groups or the terrorist organizations. Now, as far as data is concerned, we all know that data is becoming the world's most precious commodity, and attacks on data and data systems are bound to intensify, and this is a kind of warning that has been provided in this article. Now, the way in which data is being used and cycled across the globe makes it more vulnerable to cyber attacks. And the data in circulation can be divided into three types. First is data at rest, second is data in motion, and third is data in use. Now, data at rest is that data which is being created and stored simultaneously. However, data in motion is that data which is being transmitted across insecure, unsecure, and uncontrolled networks, while the data in use is that when it is being consumed. So such kind of exposure of the data at all the levels is going to intensify the risk of cyber attack. And this brings us to what needs to be done in the future. So it has been highlighted that the cyber security professionals are now engaged in building what is known as zero trust based environment. And this is a very important concept in securing the networks. Now, zero trust is a cyber security concept which is centered on the belief that organizations should not automatically trust anything inside or outside its perimeters, and instead they must verify anything or everything trying to connect to its system before granting access. So in an organization, if there are computer systems and networks, this zero trust based environment will create a kind of perimeter to secure this network. And if anybody wants to enter this kind of network or access this network, an authentication will have to be provided. That is, nobody will have direct access to this network. So anyone from inside or even from outside will have to authenticate his or her presence. And that is how, by providing and not trusting anyone in the network, you create a zero trust based environment. And when you don't trust anyone, you will have to authenticate your presence. So the strategy around zero trust boils down to don't trust anyone. So this is one of the approaches that is being deployed in the cybersecurity. Further, the author says that new technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and quantum computing are promising ones for cybersecurity. And the government officials as well as businesses need to be aware of the potential threat of cyber attacks. So in this clearly we have seen that how the nature of cyber attacks is now changing, and the line between military and strategic installations as well as civilian and private companies is now getting blurred, and all these are vulnerable to cyber attacks. We have also looked at some important terms like solar winds, ransomware, phishing, etc. Also, this is a very important term and can be used in answers, that is zero trust based environment. Now the points that we have discussed in this article can be used in writing this question from your mains examination perspective. And it reads, recent cybersecurity attacks highlight that besides military and security installations, civilian and private companies are also becoming vulnerable to such attacks. In this background, discuss the changing nature of cyber attacks and the measures that are required to handle such situations. So some of the points that we have discussed can be used in writing this particular question. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 1 is related to the outcomes of the G7 summit, where Indian Prime Minister also participated as an invitee. So in this discussion, let us look at some of the key aspects of the G7 grouping. What were the outcomes of the present summit? And finally, let us look at the D10 coalition that has been proposed at this particular G7 summit. Also, what are the likely advantages and what are the likely disadvantages of the G10, or some of the challenges that are likely to be faced by the D10 coalition. Let us look at all these aspects. Some of them will be important for us from preliminary examination perspective, while others will be important for us from General Studies Paper 2 point of view in the topic International Relations. So as we all know, G7 is the name of an informal group of 7 countries. These include United States of America, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and United Kingdom. And the heads of these nations hold an annual summit with the European Union, as well as there are other invitees at these summits. Together, these countries account for about 40% of the global GDP and 10% of the world's population. However, some things that should be noted about G7 from the prelims perspective is that they do not have any legal existence because there is no treaty or convention related to the formation of G7 grouping. Also, it does not have any permanent secretariat or official members. Finally, leaders of the G7 countries meet annually and discuss emerging global issues. The presidency of the G7 meeting is held by each of the 7 members in turn each year. This year, the presidency was held by United Kingdom for the year 2021. And the invitees this year included 4 other countries, which include India, Australia, South Korea, and South Africa as guest participants. So these are some facts related to G7 grouping from our preliminary examination perspective. Now, what were the key outcomes of the 47 G7 meet? First and foremost, and the most important one, was the Build Back Better World project, or the B3W project, that has been proposed by the United States of America. And it has been conceptualized by the United States of America to narrow the US dollar 40 trillion infrastructure needs of the developing worlds. And it is being touted as an alternative infrastructure initiative to counter China's Belt Road Initiative. It will work on the principles of transparency and inclusion and will respect environmental and labor laws. So basically, the Build Back Better World project, which will be about $40 trillion infrastructure project in various developing countries, is being seen as an alternative to China's Belt Road Initiative, and that is why this is one of the most important initiatives or outcomes of the 47 G7 meet. Secondly, all the countries reached a deal on global minimum corporate taxes, and this deal is aimed at controlling tax evasion by multinational companies. Now, details of this global minimum corporate tax deal will be released soon. Further, G7 will donate 1 billion COVID vaccines to developing nations. Also, these countries have called for timely, transparent, and science-based WHO-convened Phase 2 origin study of the pandemic. Also, they highlighted the need for rule-based international and freedom of navigation with reference to China. We all know that all these things are also highlighted regarding China, at the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and the Indo-Pacific. That is, there is a need for rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific region, and that is one of the objectives of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. Also, the G7 countries have committed themselves to the target that was set up under the Paris Climate Deal, and these leaders have agreed to raise the contributions to meet an overdue spending pledge of $100 billion that was finalized at the 2015 Paris Summit. And it is aimed at helping poorer countries to cut carbon emissions and cope up with the challenges of global warming. So these are few important outcomes of the 47 G7 meet, and they can be important for us from prelims examination perspective and can also be used in various answers in the international relations. This brings us to next important topic in the G7 meet, that is D10 coalition. What is it? What are the advantages or opportunities for India? And what are the likely challenges that are to be faced by this D10 coalition? Let us look at these aspects. Now, changing nature of G7 has been termed as the new coalition that was floated at the G7 summit by the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, Boris Johnson. And he had proposed the D10 countries which were aimed at addressing China's growing technological clout in 5G technology as well as supply chain related vulnerabilities. In this line, the UK had proposed that the D10 coalition will include members of the G7 countries as well as India, South Korea and Australia. So the D10 group of coalition of democracies would include G7 countries plus these three countries, and that will be termed as a D10 coalition. Initially, it was floated to address China's technological clout in 5G technologies and also to address the supply chain vulnerabilities. However, with the change of presidentship in the United States of America, and again the faith in the liberal world order has been restored, the new group is gradually being seen as an alternate democratic arrangement against the authoritarian states like China. And that is why the D10 coalition becomes important, because the United States of America sees it as an alternative democratic arrangement against the authoritarian states like China. Now, what are the likely advantages of this proposed D10 coalition for India? Let us look at these points. First and foremost advantage of D10 coalition for India can be that this proposed 5G alliance may bring technology and investment in India. Secondly, membership in the coalition of D10 large democracies not only increases India's soft power, but it will also act as a platform for India to pursue reforms in the United Nations Security Council. So it fulfills two basic agendas. First, it increases India's soft power clout, and also it can act as a platform for India to pursue the reforms in UNSC. Why it increases the soft power status of India? Because it is a coalition of democracies and India is seen as one of the largest functional democracies of the world. Further, one of the advantages of D10 coalition can be for India is that it can act as a bulwark against Chinese expansionism in Indian Ocean, and also it can act as a bulwark against wolf warrior diplomacy of China in India's neighborhood. We all know that China has been asserting this expansionism by getting itself involved in various territorial disputes like the one that is being witnessed in South China Sea, also the territorial dispute with India along the line of actual control, and the recent skirmishes that we saw at the Galwan Valley. Wolf warrior diplomacy is basically seen as a new kind of diplomatic approach that is being adopted by the Chinese diplomats under the new president Xi Jinping. And under this wolf warrior approach, China is projecting itself to be the savior of the world. So besides projecting itself as the savior of the world, these diplomats are also involved in arm twisting of the various countries that are benefiting from the infrastructure projects under the Belt Road Initiative of China. For example, China had recently warned Bangladesh against joining the Quad Plus group, and that was seen as one of the instances of wolf warrior diplomacy. Also, it is said that if this coalition eventually turns into a trade bloc, it will improve trade and investment opportunities for India. So these are some of the likely advantages of the proposed D10 coalition for India. But at the same time, this D10 coalition also faces certain kinds of challenges. Let us look at these challenges now. Now, although the D10 group of coalition is being touted as a group of democracy, however, it has been said that the economic interconnectedness takes primacy in international relations these days, and the rigid divisions of democracies and dictatorships do not hold true. because the economic relationships are beyond the democracies and dictatorships, and because economic relations are found both between democracies as well as between the dictatorships. So that is why division of world countries into democracies and dictatorship will be blurred because of the economic interconnectedness between these two groups. Further, one of the proposed members of the D10 grouping is South Korea. It is both an ally of United States of America and is also a democracy. However, it is wary of joining a formal D10 group or a Quad Plus alliance. This is because it says that its economy is more interwoven with China, and that is why it does not want to risk the economic relations with China by joining such kind of D10 coalition. Again, the European Union is also wary of any such D10 coalition. This is because the European Union had recently signed EU-China New Investment Treaty, and that is why it would not risk itself having bad relations with China. Further, by becoming a member of D10 countries, India will project itself to be an ally of the United States of America, and that will likely alienate India's friendly powers like Vietnam, Iran and Russia, which are not democratic in nature. However, these allies are important for India's ambitions of becoming a leading power in the world. Also, the US and the European powers are themselves not dissociated with undemocratic allies. For example, we note that the United States of America has allies in the West Asia which are necessarily not democratic, and these are sometimes notoriously authoritarian, and the European countries still cultivate client dictatorships in Africa. For example, US's biggest ally in the Western Asia is the Saudi Arabia. However, Saudi Arabia is not at all a democracy and is an authoritarian regime. And that is why US, which is touting D10 to be a group of democracies as different from dictatorships and authoritarian regimes, would not stand true. So these are some of the challenges or issues that are likely to be faced by the D10 coalition ideologically. So in this discussion, we have seen some important facts related to prelims examination and also some facts that are important for us from the mains examination perspective. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 7 is another important article in today's newspaper that is related to General Studies paper 3 and the subtopic security. Now this article mainly talks about the issue of bioweapons as well as the biosafety. In this regard, he has highlighted clearly that there is lack of regulation of bioweapons across the globe, and the present bioweapon convention has several issues in its functioning. And that is why there is a need for more focus on the bioweapons in the light of growing research and development that is taking place in the field of synthetic biology. So the author clearly highlights that the traditional notion of security is undergoing a change, and the growth of exponential technologies such as synthetic biology, artificial intelligence and nanotechnology are bound to change the theory and practice of national security. And in this regard, there is rapid rise of synthetic biology, and the danger of bioweapons needs to be focused upon more by the countries across the globe. So in this article, we'll try and understand what is meant by synthetic biology and how it is a threat to national security. Also, what are the issues with the regulatory regime related to bioweapons across the globe, and also some key aspects of Biological and Toxin Weapon Convention of 1972. Also, how prepared is India and what are the issues in India regarding the regulation of biosafety. Let us look at these aspects from our mains examination perspective in General Studies paper 3 in the topic security. Now regarding synthetic biology, the author says that it is a double-edged sword. This is because besides having various benefits, it also poses certain threats to the national security. Now, synthetic biology simply refers to the change in the biological structure of various organisms by the use of technologies like genetic engineering. So, author says that synthetic biology is a revolutionary technology which can help us manipulate biological organisms and processes for human betterment, and especially in treating diseases by re-engineering the cells and the DNAs. However, the author says that the reality is that there has been little focus on the threats that are emanating from such biological sources or such engineering or the changes that are brought out in the biological structures of the organisms. Further, the author says that there is possibility of deliberate misuse of such synthetic biology technologies against the security of the nations. So the author says that with increasing access to such technologies, there is a need to review the biosecurity systems in place where such technologies are in use. And accidental leaks of experimental pathogens, viruses, and bacteria is another area of concern as far as synthetic biology is concerned. And all this has been said in the context of the virus that is leading to the pandemic across the globe. Further, it has been highlighted that insufficiently trained staff, inadequately safeguarded facilities, and lack of proper protocols could be behind the leaks from the laboratories of such pathogens. A well-planned attack using highly infectious pathogens synthetically engineered in a lab could be highly disastrous to the populations across the globe. So these are some of the threats that have been highlighted regarding the misuse or the potential misuse of the synthetic biology. Now, traditionally, various threats to national security have been taken care of across the globe. For example, nuclear security or nuclear threat was one of the biggest challenges in front of the world. However, the nuclear threat was taken care of by various treaties and conventions related to nuclear field. However, unlike the nuclear domain, the fields of biology or synthetic biology are not properly regulated internationally, despite growing military interest in synthetic biology applications and their potential misuse. So basically, although the world has been focusing on other threats to national security, they have all undermined the potential threat of synthetic biology that poses threats to national security. In this regard, there is a convention by the name Biological and Toxin Weapon Convention of 1972 that takes care of the bioweapons, etc. However, it has various issues in its functioning. That is, it does not have an implementing body like the other conventions have. For example, the Organization for Prevention of Chemical Weapons is the implementing body for the Chemical Weapon Convention. Similarly, for NPT treaty, there is IAEA, which is the verification regime. However, the Biological Toxin Weapon Convention does not have a verification clause. Also, it does not have clearly laid out rules and procedures to guide research in this field. So let us look at some key aspects of the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention of 1972 and its key aspects. Now, regarding the Biological and Toxin Weapon Convention of 1972, you should note that it bans the development, stockpiling, acquisition, retention, and production of biological agents and toxins of types and in quantities that have no justification for prophylactic, protective, or other peaceful purposes. It also bans weapons, equipments, and delivery vehicles that are designed to use such agents or toxins for hostile purposes or in armed conflicts. So if a biological agent or toxin does not have a justification of preventing disease, that is what is meant by prophylactic use, it will be banned by this convention of 1972 related to biological and toxin weapons. So all the biological agents which does not have any justification for prophylactic or prevention of diseases, protective or other peaceful purposes have been banned by the Biological and Toxin Weapon Convention. Now this convention requires the state parties to destroy or divert to peaceful purposes the agents, toxins, weapons and equipments and means of delivery described above within the 9 months of convention's entry into force. Further, the Biological Weapon Convention does not ban the use of biological and toxin weapons, but it reaffirms itself to 1925 Geneva Protocol, which basically prohibits the biological and toxin weapons. Also, it does not ban the biodefense programs. That is, any research that is taking place in various countries regarding defending themselves from biological weapons has not been banned. However, this is one of the biggest criticism of the Biological and Toxin Weapon Convention because these biodefense programs are now being converted into bioweapons and are being used, or that is the potential threat of the biodefense programs. Further, regarding verification, the treaty regime mandates that the state parties should consult with one another and cooperate bilaterally, multilaterally to solve the compliance concern. It further allows the state parties to lodge complaint with the UN Security Council if they believe that the other members are violating the convention. However, the Security Council can investigate complaints, but this power has never been invoked till now. So clearly, there is no clear verification regime and the parties can complain regarding non-compliance with this convention to the UN Security Council. However, it has not been invoked till date. And that is mainly because of the veto power that is retained by various countries or powerful countries across the globe. For example, China is a member of the Security Council. So if any such kind of resolution is brought against China, it will never be passed, and as such, Security Council has its limitation in the implementation or verification of the Biological and Toxin Weapon Convention. Now regarding the implementation also, there have been various issues, and as such, various state parties to this convention have also been accused in the past for the violation of the treaty. For example, Russia, Iraq, North Korea, Syria have all been accused by United States of America for not complying with the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. Now this brings us to next important issue, that is how well is India prepared regarding the biological weapon attack, etc. So it has been said that India is underprepared compared to more developed countries in this area. This is because of the poor disease surveillance, insufficient coordination among various government departments that are dealing with the biosecurity issues. Also, there are multiple institutions that are dealing with biosafety and biosecurity threats, but there is no coordination among them. One of the examples that is highlighted is that the implementation of biosafety guidelines is the responsibility of Science and Technology Ministry and the Environment Ministry. However, the labs that are dealing with biological research are set up under the Indian Council of Medical Research and the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, and both these are under the Ministry of Health and Agriculture respectively. This means that two different ministries are dealing with two different topics which needs coordination. And because different ministries are dealing with setting up of labs or implementation of biosafety rules, that is why there is lack of coordination. And finally, it has been highlighted that India, which is having porous borders and ill-trained border control institutions, is not very well prepared for defending itself against pathogens or dangerous biological organs or biological weapons. In this line, the present pandemic is a wake-up call, and these issues should be taken care of seriously by countries across the globe, and especially India, which is seen to be underprepared for this kind of eventuality. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, the next two articles that we are dealing with are important for us from the preliminary examination perspective. In this line, the first article is on page number 11, and it is related to rare earth metals, which are at a kind of rivalry that is happening between China and United States of America. And this rivalry is because China is one of the largest producers of rare earth metals that are important for manufacturing of various important items. Now, over-dependence on China of the Western world for these rare earth metals is becoming a cause of concerns to nations like United States of America and European Union. And that is why this has come into newspaper. So in this context, it is important for us to learn about the rare earth metals from the preliminary examination perspective. Now, rare earth metals are the group of 17 chemical elements that occur in the periodic table. So in this line, if you see the periodic table, they refer to the elements that are included in the lanthanide series. And the group consists of yttrium and 15 lanthanide elements. Now, these rare earth metals are abundant in the Earth's crust. However, they are rarely mined, and that is why they were termed as rare earth metals. Now, China is one of the largest holder or has the largest reserves in the world apart from Canada. Also, China is the largest producer of rare earth metals, which has widespread applications, and the Western world is dependent on China for the manufacturing of these products and the supply of rare earth metals. And because China produces about 90% of the rare earth metals, it is inevitable for any country to depend upon China for the supply of these rare earth metals. Now, rare earth metals and the alloys that are made by using these earth metals are used in many devices that we use in our everyday lives. These include computer memory, DVDs, rechargeable batteries, cell phones, catalytic converters, magnets, fluorescent lightings, and much more. Regarding properties of rare earth metals, these elements are highly reactive. They are silvery white metals which tarnish when they are exposed to air because they form the oxides. Also, these are relatively soft. However, hardness increases somewhat with higher atomic number. So what are the key applications? You can see that first application is in the magnetics. It is used in computer hard drives, disk drive motors, anti-lock brakes, automotive parts, frictionless bearings, etc. They are used in CRT, LPD, LCT, fluorescent lighting, medical imaging, lasers, fibers, etc. They are also used in batteries, fuel cells, and they have applications in capacitors, sensors, polishing compounds, pigments, and coatings, also in satellite communication, guidance system, etc. So you can see that it has widespread application, and that is why they are very important. So these applications can also be asked in your preliminary examination, because this is one of the favorite areas of UPSC, which requires us to identify the applications of various products and also the important technologies. That is why applications of rare earth metals is also very important for us from preliminary examination perspective. Then this brings us to next important topic that is there on page number 10, and that is because of a new discovery of tree of coffee in Andaman and Nicobar Island. In 2016, UPSC has asked a question regarding a new banana species that was discovered in Andaman and Nicobar, and that is why the discovery of this tree of coffee is extremely important for us from preliminary examination perspective. So it looks like this, and it is named as Pyrostria lalji. Now regarding Pyrostria lalji, you should note that it is a 15-meter tall tree that belongs to the genus of coffee family, and it has recently been discovered from Andaman Islands by a team of researchers from India and Philippines. It is found in Andaman for the first time. That is, it is not just found in Andaman, it is also found in other places, but it has been discovered for the first time. So besides Andaman, it is also found in Madagascar and Africa. Regarding the IUCN status of this plant, it is critically endangered species. Now this tree is distinguished by a long stem with a whitish coating on the trunk, and it was first reported from the Wundur forest in South Andaman. It is found growing under large trees, shaded and rocky areas, along with herbs and shrubby plants. So these are some facts related to Pyrostria lalji, but the most important thing regarding this discovery is that it has been found in Andaman Nicobar, which becomes important for us from the preliminary examination perspective. With this, we conclude today's discussion, and this is the question for the day.